This is Dan Dix here reporting for Press for Truth, coming at you here at the Justice in Focus Symposium here with the one and only Graeme MacQueen. I was just talking to Richard Gage, and I pointed out to him how, first of all, it's amazing that it's been 15 years since the September 11th attacks, but on top of that, it's almost also hard to believe it's been 5 whole years since we made the Toronto hearings on 9/11. So I'm curious, in the 5 years since the release of that film, how have you seen the progression of the movement, and how are things going since 2010?
It's always hard to answer that one, Dan. I would say we've grown more sophisticated all the time. I was reading the other day the paper that Steve Jones wrote 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, published the Journal of 9/11 Studies 2006, and he said, wow, Steve really nailed it. All this stuff, there's thermite, and there's extreme temperatures and molten metal and free fall, and he got so many of the essentials there. But in those 10 years since then, we've refined it all. So you get the paper on the nanothermite, and you get several really good studies on acceleration of buildings and why it violates the laws of physics, and more work on the extreme temperatures. So I think if you're going to keep a movement like this alive, you have to continually produce new studies, try and refine what you've done before. That's what I did. I got to the point where I got curious about these anthrax attacks. I had heard that they were an inside job. Well, it seemed to me that was kind of important if it was true. So I thought I'd write a paper on it, and the paper turned into a book. And so, of course, that's an example of what I was doing during the last 5 years. And now I can say quite confidently there was a single operation that happened in the fall of 2001 in the U.S., and it had 2 parts. What we call 9/11 was the first part, the airplane attacks. What we call the anthrax attacks were the second part, and they used overlapping personnel. It's clear it was the same operation. So that's just an example I give from my own studies of how we continue to refine our studies. We continue to confirm the suspicions we had before.
I love that answer and how it's going in that direction. And for other academics and intellectuals such as yourself out there who are maybe just starting to come across this information, and perhaps they're on the fence, they may be a little iffy about actually taking that leap and getting out and putting themselves out there. What sort of advice might you have for somebody who is in the field of academia and is maybe on the fence about jumping head into this?
Well, I think there's no excuse now. If a person thinks this is important, they need to take a little time out to look at it. I'm kind of old-fashioned that way. I think you should read a couple of books. The internet's good, and there's lots of good stuff there. There's lots of good films. But, for example, if you're interested in the destruction, I should say, of the World Trade Center buildings, and by the way, you don't have to have a PhD in anything, to see what's wrong there. Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth came out with a very fine booklet in this last year called Beyond Misinformation. And you can get it from their website. And, any reasonably well-educated adult in North America should be able to take their time and go through that and see why we can now say we have proven, and I don't use that word lightly, that we've proven that the official narrative of how those buildings were destroyed is false. And that's a good place to start. You could also look, if we're talking about the internet, at the Journal of 9/11 Studies. You can look at the 9/11 Consensus Panel, which has now generated 48 points on which we have consensus among an international panel that the official narrative is false. So there's really, and Architects and Engineers puts out a broad array of things. Some you can read in 10 minutes, and some you take your time with. David Ray Griffin has produced about 10 books on 9/11. He's just coming out with a new one in October. There's no excuse. Anything from 15-minute video to a big book, it's all out there.
You're right. The information is out there. I guess it's up to the individual to be responsible enough to educate themselves before they step out into the open, right?
That's right. You have to be convinced that it's not all kooky before you're willing to give a little time to it. So that's where people look on the internet and they make up their mind. It took me a while. It took me a while to realize that it wasn't kooky and that it was worth investing some serious time in. And so I challenge people out there, ordinary folks, academics, come on. This is really important. We're talking about the founding of the War on Terror, which has led to several million deaths, many more displacements of human beings, and getting humanity off track when we should be addressing serious problems like climate change. So look into it, folks.
Yeah, I agree. It's the most important thing you can do. What are some of the URLs, or do you have any links where people can go to learn more from you?
Well, I mean, I don't have my own website and Facebook and stuff, but I belong to several of the groups I've mentioned. So, for example, I'm co-editor of the Journal of 9/11 Studies, and I'm on the International 9/11 Consensus Panel. I'm one of the members of that. And, you know, so I contribute in that. They can buy my anthrax book. It's on Amazon. And by the way, Canada had its own very fishy terror attacks in 2014, and I produced a report on one of those, which also can be found on the internet. That's the invasion of Parliament, which led to our repressive C-51 bill and many other things.
Fantastic. I'd be very interested in seeing that report, as I'm sure a lot of the PFT audience will as well. So thank you very much. We will have descriptions in the links in the description of this video, so be sure to check it out. Graeme, thank you so much for talking to us. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Dan.
All right.